Okay. Thank you everyone for attending. This is our candidate forum for the NASPA Region 2 Regional Director-elect elections, which are already open. And so we encourage you to vote, but in the NASPA elections for both the new board chair as well as for our regional director and other positions that are being offered uh, in the election this year. This is part of our effort to make sure you are aware of who all the candidates are. And so I wanted to hold this candidate forum. By the way, my name, I should start with that, is Jeffery Putman. I'm the Vice President for Academic and Student Affairs at SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University, and I am the past Region 2 Director. And I'd like to, these are the two candidates who are being offered for Regional Director-elect. And so I'd ask them just to briefly introduce themselves before we get into questions. Also, please feel free to use the chat to ask questions, or let me raise your hand and I will pick on you to answer the questions. So why don't we just going in alphabetical order? I'll ask Dr. Tim Gordon to start by introducing himself.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey, and good to be with you and my friend Danielle. Uh, I am Tim Gordon. I'm currently the Associate Vice President for Student Development Access and Support at Rochester Institute of Technology, and I'm just very excited to be connected today. I've been in higher ed a little while, was at Buffalo State as Vice President before this, and have done really work in the student success retention space, as well as sort of leading comprehensive student affairs units.
Hey,
Great. Good
thank you.
afternoon, everyone. My name is Danielle Nesselbush. I serve as the Dean of Students and Title IX Coordinator at DUville University, just down the road from Tim in Rochester. I'm located in the heart of Buffalo, New York. I sort of came up through the housing area of student affairs, and now I am serving in the Dean of Students role here at DUville, which is a small private health professions institution in the heart of Buffalo.
Great, thank you. So I have a couple of questions just to get the conversation started. And again, if other folks have questions, feel free to put them either in the chat or to raise your hand. We have no problem calling on folks as well. But we'll start out for folks that don't necessarily know you well. Can you share a little about your path? You've shared some already, your path in student affairs and what's kept you connected to NASPA.
Danielle?
Cool. I'll start. So I actually went to graduate school for student personnel administration at Buffalo State University and here in Buffalo. And during that time, I was able to have experiences in a variety of things, all outside of housing and residence life. So it made natural sense that I would be hired to work in residence life at Hood College in Frederick, Maryland. I served as an area coordinator and then assistant director of housing and residence life there for about 5 years. And then I went to Lynchburg, Virginia, and worked at Randolph College for about a year. And then home called back. And so I went to Damon University here in Buffalo, and I was there for about 5.5 years. And I was in housing during COVID. And so naturally, I swore off higher education and left Damon. And I went to do some project management work for a company in Buffalo. And then DUville came calling and they made an offer I couldn't refuse. And so I lasted about 7 months outside of higher ed, but I was really thankful to have the people that while I was not in higher ed for that short amount of time, helped me realize that my passion is higher education. And I knew that because of those people, I would be able to, continue with my community, even if I was not necessarily in NASPA due to my work.
So when I grew up, I was going to be a lawyer. So um, I'm a first generation college student, and I had no idea about this profession. And so was an RA and started, like Danielle, my career in housing and doing that work, and really moved into with some mentorship and support from some deans in areas launching a first year experience and starting to look at sort of this connected learning around student success, particularly for engineering at the engineering and science students at the time. And so as I finished graduate school, I knew I wanted to move through the profession. I was starting to discover sort of the things that made me tick, but I knew what transformation I was having in my life as a professional and a first gen student who had so many people pour into me from student affairs. And so I came to know that work sort of as real work as opposed to just folks who were helping out. And I knew I wanted to continue to help people. So I stayed involved as I moved as a new professional. And as a new professional, I started my second professional job, presented my first set of research around learning communities with a number of folks who were luminaries and still are in the space. And that's how I got connected to NASPA, even though I knew from graduate school. And then moved my way through sort of the administrative ranks. I knew I wanted to, try to push forward and become at some point a vice president and maybe a college president. So spent time in this space around sort of bopping between academic affairs and student affairs and looking at student connected learning. Went up to Chicago, which is home, mostly home for me, between Chicago and Detroit, and became an inaugural director of a center for first year students and built that center. Went on to be dean of students with a little d at one of the professional schools at Northwestern and supervised that operation. Then became dean of students with the big D at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and then vice president at Buffalo State before I came to RIT as associate vice president. So really for me, that connection with NASPA, my regional colleagues, has been really important in terms of mentorship and thought partners to help me continue to look at how do we sort of advance this work, and be informed in terms of the work that we do. And I certainly have had a chance to do that with my colleagues here in Region 2.
Hey, so when you think about Region 2 today, and we use the hashtag sometimes Region 2 rocks, right? We try to make NASPA Region 2 serve all of our constituent groups. What excites you the most, or you feel is the most important to pay attention to as you potentially assume this role? Tim, why don't you go first this time?
Yeah, as I think about the region, you think about our profession, we have some really strong powerhouse institutions, lots of places that have sort of, developed, significant professionals. But also, I think the breadth of the region gives us an opportunity to explore the issues. So I remember uh, in Region 2 work, I'm the public policy working group chair. And um, thinking about what was evolving at the time in other states around DEI and at the same time this sort of challenge with higher education. So I think the interesting thing is in Region 2, I think we do some really good work and we really center, for example, equity and inclusion across most of the institutions within the region. I think our opportunity there, sort of what we're seeing and what is exciting is how do we continue to lean into that leadership in the current context? How do we empower professionals at all levels around to sort of see how we do our work in that space and as higher education professionals within the context now that affects all of us across the country as opposed to sort of this regional piece. But given our history and the work that we do in the institutions, I think we also have a really great opportunity to continue to lead this work, and be sort of a bellwether for how it can continue to be done well.
Yeah, I think for me, what excites me the most is continuing to keep our identity. I think Region 2 um, has become known for being fun and being energetic and passionate about the work that we do. We're known for being collaborative. I think that's really important and innovative and doing things that works for us. And I think that that's really important to me. And that is something that I'm really excited about. I also think that making sure that we have stake in everybody for the region, that, no matter what level of professional you are, whether you're a graduate student all the way through SSAOs and presidents, making sure that our work that we do, that going back to what Tim said, the work that we do is being underscored. And because we've got some really great professionals and institutions in our region that you may or may not know about, but I think it's important that we continue to highlight those so that the work of the region is being showcased.
So to continue on that path a little bit, Region 2 is made up of a really wide mix of types of institutions, types of professionals. How do you think about helping people feel connected and included across that kind of diversity of institutions and professional levels and professional types and et cetera? Danielle, why don't you take that one first?
Yeah, the way that the the board is currently structured, we have a number of different roles on the board that cater to a specific level. So whether you're mid-manager, senior, new professionals and graduate students, I really want to make sure that we highlight and utilize those people that are in those roles so that we can find and cultivate the connections between those specific professional levels. But also, I think we've done a really good job, and I'd like to continue the work of us connecting those senior level professionals with those graduate and entry level professionals. Our field is made up of all mentors. And so if you're not mentoring someone, then you're definitely a mentee. And so making sure that we bridge the connection between those specific groups, but also making sure that we provide low or no cost education to the various constituent groups to make sure that just as much as we get poured into as professionals, that we can also provide that to our regional constituents.
Yeah, and I think Jeffrey, Danielle talked a lot about relationship, and I think that is certainly something I see as a strength within our region, and that we have folks and professionals at all levels that are willing to reach out and be connected. I think the ways we do that, given our geography and those sorts of things, some of the things we've been doing as a region is really building up that structure of sort of more regional, informal networking opportunities. And I think that's something we have to continue to look at and look at where that's working well and maybe where we have gaps to re-engage folks. So I think those relationships, those mentorships start with those connections, and those are either in person, virtually. The other piece I'm proud of that we've been working on in the public policy space is really how we're leveraging our blogs and now some podcasting to really provide information to people, but also I think as an entree to get connected to people who have interests that might be similar to yours, or if you're doing research as a new professional or you're struggling with a particular issue. How do we connect, make those connections? But I think that mentorship and that sort of, reaching down from those folks who maybe have more experience in working with our emerging colleagues and our new colleagues to be able to hear, one, as leaders, what are their needs and how do we improve our work in the region by listening to them. And I think all of those spaces give us moments to be able to do that, where we're intentional, even when we're building podcasts and blogs, that we're representing the breadth of not only regional institutions across the region, but levels of professionals represented. Oftentimes I think the thought leaders we go to are the folks who are more established, and I think what we are seeing, and I think the sort of how this landscape has shifted is really folks are getting the information from all sorts of places, and so it's not just sort of that traditional sort of more senior folks doing that, but it's really giving voices to those new professionals and making sure we represent that diversity of voices and have mechanisms to do that.
Thank you both. And as a reminder for those who came in, if you want to ask a question, feel free to add it to the chat, or you can raise your hand, and I'm happy to call on folks to answer questions. Otherwise, we can continue this conversation and to continue on a piece that Tim brought up. From where you sit, what are some of the big issues or trends in higher ed or student affairs that regional leaders should be paying close attention to?
Well, I'm a little bit biased there. My colleagues know I'm going to probably say this. Most folks didn't want to really pay attention to policy. Like it's just not an exciting space, but it is an important space. Again, I alluded to it earlier, right? That at one point we had the luxury of sort of seeing this as not an issue that was affecting our region. And I think policy and how that gets implemented and how we do the work that we do to continue to advocate and be supporters of each other, be supporters of students, the stress that is really put on our professionals at all levels about how to navigate this ever-changing and complex and messy space. Every day there's some different guidance, and some institutions are taking different stances, whether that's sort of seeing that they need to be compliant proactively or pushing the envelope to see what can still happen. But ultimately, what gets lost in that piece is that we have students that need to be served, and we have to understand that no matter what happens outside of our institutions in our region, the reality is that we know our students and we know the gaps that creates for them. We know the stress that it creates for them. I work a lot with international students currently, and we are certainly doing a lot to make sure that we support our students and trying to network with colleagues in the region, to really look at, for example, as that issue. I also think, the challenge of our reputation in higher education. I was just reading a piece this morning about really the sort of this influencer culture, right? And that's even really how many families and students in our institutions are now being represented. That folks, given whether it's the policy landscape or just not a lot of faith in higher education right now and our reputation, folks are looking to others to validate their interest or their in institutions sort of ability, and so to transform lives and be sort of a worthy investment. And I think we have to lean into that. And I think many of our professionals who are boots on the ground have a sense about how that works, but how we leverage that in ways that are appropriate and befitting what we do. And so continuing to think about how we reach our students, how we serve them, and how we support each other as we navigate this sticky wicket of work, which or policy that impacts our work, which on a daily basis can change. And certainly we know across the region, across the country, we have colleagues who have been laid off or moved out of roles because of some of this legislative piece. And that all has an impact on the work that we do and the success of the students who show up.
Yeah, I think some issues and trends that I can see and from where I sit in higher education, I want to echo what Tim said. Yes, 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 yes. I don't think that the decisions that are being made in Washington, D.C. are not going away. And so sometimes, in this field, we have to adapt, sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, sometimes annually, to adapt with what the federal regulations are. But I think in addition to those, our students are coming to colleges with much more mental health and much more anxiety. And, we need to be prepared for that. And I think that's something that here at DUville, we do a really good job of meeting students where they're at. We've got an online mental health resource that students can get mental health resources at any time during the day or night. So I think that that's something that's really going to continue to shape the way that we do our work here in higher education. I also think the digital transformation is coming whether we're ready for it or not. So I think preparing our students with AI, using it in the classroom, not being scared of it, and figuring out how us as professionals can use it in our everyday work. And then lastly, something that we see here at DUville, our employers, we're a primarily healthcare institution. And so our students are being asked to go directly into the emergency rooms, directly into the hospitals. So employers are wanting career readiness, and they don't want, for lack of a better word, they don't want a warm-up lap. They want our students to graduate with their diplomas and then be ready to go right into the workforce. So getting that hands-on training while they're in school so that they can make the mistakes early on so that when they're fully employed, they don't make those mistakes. So there's a number of things that I think are in higher ed that we need to keep our eye on, right now, but also in the future.
Great. To shift topics a little bit. How do you see Region 2 fitting into NASPA's broader national work and priorities? Danielle,
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to our new strategic plan that NASPA will be providing, I think in March that they're coming out with it. And so I look forward to seeing how the region can support that. I anticipate, student mental health and well-being being on there. And so figuring out how we can support that, but also how we as a region are supporting each other. And so I think that it's important that while we understand what national what the student affairs as a whole is doing, but also really taking pulse at what do our constituents want in our region. We have 7 very different states in our region, and so trying to figure out where we can find some commonality and where we can focus on as a region. But I really think our biggest priority is going to be supporting the national office and the new strategic plan that I know has been a labor of love for the last year.
Well, and I also think our role is to help sort of translate that work really down the funnel, right? To get at a more granular level. So when you think about, um, you know, whether it's the discussion right now about preparatory programs, like I alluded to, we have a number of significant ones of them in this region, but it really is about working to make sure voices of new professionals are being elevated to help shape that conversation, that folks who have been around the space for a while are able to be a part of that conversation. So we have the job, I think, of pushing that down and making sure that it becomes whatever is translated becomes representative. And then I also think to push a little bit, right? I think it's I alluded to this earlier, right? We've done some things really well regionally in terms of some of our commitments and the way we serve folks, whether that's um, the mental health space or the some food insecurity pieces. Certainly, this region has led a lot of that, and so continue to be a voice and a beacon to say, well, wait a minute, how does that look for what is happening on the ground? How are we engaging those things? And sort of not replicating, and I'm certainly not saying that as an organization we would do this, but I think it's also making sure that we're just not sort of letting conjecture drive, but really making sure we're doing what we can uh, to represent the voices of folks in our region to shape NASPA and our direction. So the organization has a strategic plan, but what does that really mean in terms of meat on the bones when we get down to the campus level, when we are talking about practitioners in West Virginia or Maryland or Delaware or DC? And so I think that's an important role that we play. And I think we have historically been a little bit of a region that has pushed the envelope, that has done some advocacy, that is, challenged things. So I'm really curious about, Danielle talked about AI, and I think it's something that will be very interesting to understand how that fits into our profession and how we're using it. I mean, there's certainly lots of use cases now, but I think uh, it's helping both translate that up and translate it down. And I think we can do as a region and make sure those voices are widely represented.
I have 2 more questions, and again, if folks have other things they want us to ask about, please feel free to add that to the room. And I second Francisco's message that he put in the chat to everyone to make sure that you've come here, so you've taken the first step. So make sure you do the step and actually vote in the election to make your voice heard, not just in this election, but also for our national board chair elect, et cetera. But to go back to other questions, can you share a moment from your leadership experience or your career thus far, where you brought people together around a shared goal, and what did you take away from it? And
I forget whose
forgot
turn
the
it
order.
is,
I
Tim.
think
Is it
Tim,
mine?
it's you first this time.
All right. I've had the privilege of serving as an institutional leader, and what I have learned from that. And so as I talked earlier, my space is how do we create this ecosystem that helps focus on student success, and that means equity. That means all of those things go into um, sort of that mix as far as I'm concerned. And I think my privilege has been to work with amazing teams where we can help commonly shape what does that mean? What does student success mean for us? This is one of the discussions we're having here with some reorganizing. And so our definition of success has been fairly narrow. It's been focused, mostly on the curriculum, but we know that there are so many pieces outside of that. And a lot of that is the expertise that we as professionals, student affairs professionals, possess. And so, what I think I've been most proud of, and I think has been most helpful in my leadership, is to be able to rally the division or the group of folks, the professionals around, to give voice to that and talk about the strength that we bring to the table in terms of success and what we truly can own and lean into, and then using that as a way to build those bridges and transform that institutional conversation with us being seen as equal partners and experts at the table. That has been something I have aspired to do in every role that I have had. Some might call me a little bit of a rabble rouser, but the reality is that we all have a stake in that success. It is student success is not nearly defined in that way, but also many times I think as a set of professionals, given how our institutions operate, we can sometimes feel our role isn't primary and we don't lean into what really our strength is. And so getting folks to do that and getting the institution to see it and embrace it and work in partnership with us to improve it is really what I've been proud of being able to do.
I think my example is, as Tim was talking, I was thinking about all the examples here at Duville, but I'm going to take a NASPA example. My colleague Trish and I were selected for the 2020 regional co-chairs for our regional conference. And if anybody remembers, we had that little thing called COVID during that time. And so Trisha and I in 2019 got a group together and we're planning a 2020 conference, which then turned into a 2021 conference, which eventually then finally was executed in 2022 in Niagara Falls. And so, when you sign on to be a conference chair, you know that you're expected to bring a group of people together and put together a good conference, and then you go on your way after about a year and a half. My colleague and we made the decision after the first postponement that we were going to be in it for the long haul. So 3.5 years later, we finally got to do our conference. And, while it was challenging, I also thought that made me think about the resilience of student affairs professionals and how yes, it was a challenge, but you just sort of go through it, and that's the best that you can do. And we were lucky enough to have a number of professionals who stayed with us through that entire time. And then we unfortunately lost some professionals as well due to job reassignments or moving out of the region or responsibilities change or just COVID in general and just burned out. So I think that was a really great opportunity to see how if you bring people together and meet them where they're at. In some meetings, we would just sit on the computer screens because that's all we did during those 2.5 years and say, what can we do? How are things? How can we support each other? And I think that was a really important moment in my NASPA volunteer experience because it allowed me to not necessarily be just the leader of the group, but also really talk with people and have honest conversations about what was going on in their lives on their campuses. And there's not a lot I miss from COVID, but I think having that connection where we had to be engaged on the screen and that was our way of communicating was something that I did enjoy from that time.
So I was going to ask one question to close it out, but actually, our colleague Michelle put it in the chat written better than the way I wrote it. So I'm going to ask her question instead of the one I was going to ask, but it's almost the same. If selected as regional director, what legacy would you hope to leave that reflects your values and vision for the region? And I think Danielle, you get first shot.
That's a good question. Of course, it came from Michelle. I think my legacy is that I want to make sure that I maintain what we're known for. I want to bring the fun. I want to be extra. I want to, have great socials, have great annual conferences. But to that, and the heart of the work is our people, and I think that we do a really good job of that in Region 2, and I would want to continue to capitalize on that. So focusing on our people and what they bring to the profession. But I also think looking at our people and say, what can they give to the profession? And so looking at our professional development opportunities for our grads and new professionals and making sure that, we capitalize on the people that we have in the region in order to provide some really great professional development opportunities that don't involve flying across the country or to another state, that they can just log on to a computer or have a different experience maybe right in their hometown. So bringing the fun, I think, would be important, not lose our regional identity, but also being able to capitalize on the people that we have in our region and being able to provide some really great professional development opportunities.
I hope, I had a chance to sort of really reflect on this as I made my last transition and, left a job and was out of work for a while and sort of thought about what was important and what did I want I'm at that point in my career where that idea of sort of how have I made the world a little bit of a better place. And I think ultimately I think what most of us aspire to do, right? Just to leave things better than we found it. I think for me, it's really important. And I hope that if I'm elected and when I'm, sort of remember that it's about making sure that we elevated and had representative tables of voices, and that we were intentional about that in doing that work. That we continue to double down on as a region, and that I led and supported efforts that continue to also have that be the experience of our students in the region, along with our professionals who are joining us from all sort of places and spaces, as we shift as sort of a profession. And so if I leave things in that condition, I think that is really important. This work for me is really core to who I am as a human. I have fallen into this work, but it is work that I think is what gets me out of bed every day. And so I hope I also am somebody who could be remembered as, and sort of seen as if elected, someone who shares that sort of passion and uses it to move the region forward.
Great. So thank you both for joining us for this and for helping put a human face on some folks who may not know you in the region so that they could make a choice about which one of you to vote for. Again, I encourage everyone to make sure that they vote. The candidates have both put statements on the website. So when you go to the election website, you will see the candidates' statements there as well, and that you'll also vote for the national roles and knowledge community roles that are also being run for this year. So thank you again to both of you, and thank you to everyone for your support of Region 2. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all. Thanks, Jeffrey. Thanks, Danielle.
Thanks, everyone.